In 2020, journalism schools went through their own reckoning, and the result, well, new classes focused on reporting on race. And many students embrace what is taught in these classes as it aligns with the ways they see journalism. But what happens when they try to take these new ideas on, and how do they engage with newsrooms? How do they take these ideas into newsrooms? What if there's pushback from senior staff? And is this new way of reporting actually better? So this is, as I said, Lisa Armstrong, who really was helpful in us planning this convening and ideating around it. Lisa is an award-winning journalist and professor of race and journalism at UC Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism. She reports on incarceration, and her work has been published in The Intercept, The New Yorker, The Texas Tribune, and other outlets. We have her students who have graduated. Corey Suzuki is a reporter and visual journalist at KPBS Public Media in San Diego, and he's a recent graduate of the UC Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism. And Maya Overstreet is a filmmaker and journalist based in Brooklyn, and she is also one of Lisa's recent graduate students. And we have Wesley Lowery. Wesley is a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist. He is the executive editor of Investigative Reporting Workshop, an innovative training hospital on journalism, nonprofit based at American University. And he's also a journalist in residence at the CUNY Newmark Graduate School of Journalism, and also a contributing editor at the Marshall Project. He's always your byline is always showing up in all these different places. We can't keep track, but we're so glad that you all could make it. You can't, yeah. Well, thank you so much, and let's get started. We're going to go into this panel, and there will be time for Q&A as well. So thank you all. Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here, and thank you. So as Amber mentioned, I am a professor of race and journalism at the UC Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism. And like many people here, I got that job in 2021. And I have been a professor for 16 years. Berkeley, like many universities, I guess, decided that they needed to have an anti-racism plan. I am an item on that anti-racism plan. They had an opening for a professor of race and journalism, and as Amber mentioned, that is the class that I teach. I will say that having taught for this long, I don't think that the solutions that many schools came up with, so I know that at the place that I was formerly teaching, the Craig Newmark Graduate School of Journalism, they also have a race and journalism class that started in 2021. I don't think that that's the best way to teach journalism, because as all of us in this room know, and as I think everybody in this country should know, race is everywhere. Like, race is a part of every single thing that we report. And as such, it is not something that should be confined to one class. It is something that should be infused within the entire curriculum, which is sort of how I have always taught. I will say that at Newmark, I've been teaching the way that I teach for many years and trying to get other people to incorporate certain things in their classes, and nobody really listened until 2020. And I became very popular. There are many universities that reached out. But I say all that to say that I am really excited to be here with my former students. And even though Wes wasn't a student of mine, long time ago, I was an editor at a site called Loop 21. And Wes was, I don't know how old then, but like a little baby journalist. So I've sort of watched all three of these people develop. And I wanted to have Maya and Corey talk a little bit about some of the work that they did in the race and journalism class. And then Wes talk about how when you take this way of reporting on communities of color, which I think is done in a sort of like more thoughtful and intentional way, and you push against what have often been norms in mainstream media, how you navigate that space. Just very briefly, the class that I teach has a couple of major assignments. One is that I ask the students to go to different communities to ask people, one, how they feel they've been covered, 2, where they get their news, so where does their information come from, and then 3, what they think that journalists could do better. Because invariably, regardless of whatever the community is, I don't think I've heard in the 2 years that I've been teaching this anyone say, yes, journalists are doing an amazing job of covering my community. The other thing that I ask students to do is to do 2 reflections. One at the beginning of the semester where I say, how do you identify in terms of your race and other things? And how does that shape how you see the world, and how does that shape your journalism? Because I think that's something that is really an important part of the work that we do. If we can't see ourselves sort of as we see ourselves, and if we can't think about how other people perceive us and how we perceive them, then it's really hard to do this job in an honest way. And then at the end of the semester, I asked them, having gone out and talked to people, how that has informed their reporting. So that's some of what we're going to talk about. And to start, we're going to look at video of interviews that Corey and Maya did with some of the folks they talked to.
The way that I see kind of like, Latinos and Mexican individuals being portrayed is oftentimes as, the traditional kind of like lazy, or that we're immigrants who struggle with English, or that, and a lot of it just kind of portrays off as negative stereotyping. I mean, especially after the 2016 campaign, where we saw, especially when then President Trump started with calling Mexican individuals rapists, and some good people. And just kind of like from there, it just started spiraling from just, depictions on video and in the back of movies onto now having, the ways that immigration crisis is portrayed. I think that the best way that journalists can start to portray Latino communities, a lot of it is just trying to be more understanding of of how the imaging and the words that they use can fuel the negative portrayals of the Latino community. A lot of it is, just being more aware and more understanding of people's situations. I mean, especially with housing. There's a lot of criticism around Latino households, which tend to be multi-generational, and so a lot of people can live under one household. So a lot of it is not that we're trying to overcrowd it, it's just that we have family that we care for and that we just want to have them around. So it's just being a little bit more understanding of kind of like the nuances when approaching subjects.
Well, I think the focus of a lot of the Asian American coverage recently has been about Asian hate crimes, which is good because they have been on the rise. It, of course, took a long time for the news to catch up with that reality. Well, I would like to see a lot more coverage of Asian Americans in the arts. I every year at the Oscars, I empathize completely with Oscars So White, and there has been a tremendous turnaround or a change in representation, I think, both at the Oscars and just in the media and in the billboards that are plastering our city of people of color. But I still see Asians missing from those spaces, particularly in the entertainment space. And that could be because there's just not as many people Asian Americans in that space, but I just find that a little hard to believe. I just dig deeper, just go find these people because they exist. They must. I mean, there was a whole cast of them in Crazy Rich Asians. I mean, that's like a terrible example, but it's just like there's whole countries of actors who are doing English language content, and I think there's a real lack of coverage of Asian Americans in the arts, Asian Americans in politics. I mean, actually, I think there's a lot to be done on the politics of Asian Americans.
Thank you. So to start, I'm going to start with Maya. What did you learn from speaking to the people that you talked to during the class?
So for a little bit of context, I was in a group of about 4 or 5, and we were assigned the Asian American community. And yeah, I think we learned that there is just a huge lack in coverage all around, particularly as what Sachi Cunningham said, in the arts, in politics, and but also just the diaspora as a whole. I think Asian Americans and Asian people are grouped to be Asian, but there are Pacific Islanders. There is South Asians. Excuse me if I'm botching the term, but yeah, I think there's just a lack of coverage in general, and there is a grouping that is a little bit too general, and the coverage, from what we heard, needs to be very specific. We talked to, we wanted to make sure that we talked to a range of people. So Sachi Cunningham is a Japanese American in San Francisco, and we talked to a young Indian girl in San Francisco also, and there's a huge lack in coverage there too. So I think in general there is an issue with grouping Asian people all together, and there is a lot to learn about each community that's not covered.
Thank you. And Corey, same question.
I mean, I think our group saw a lot of the same things that Maya's group saw. I worked on the group that was sent out to chat with folks from the Latino community, and I think what we heard a lot of was just that people felt really strongly about seeing these stereotyped images or portrayals of people from their community and people who looked like them in the press constantly, and that what they really wanted, a lot of the people that we spoke to, was just to be seen as full individuals with distinct identities from different communities, different countries, different backgrounds, different classes, different intersecting, all of these different intersecting identities that I think they just did not see, and what they saw instead was this sort of flattening of all of those identities, and in turn, like our speaker mentioned, just how that was used by political leaders to dehumanize the Latino community and to make it easier for people in general, the American public, to not see people from Latino identities as full people. And I think I also one thing that really stuck out to me was how many solutions that people offered to, how many just really immediate things they pointed out that we could change as journalists, and really material ways that we could alter the stories that we tell. I thought that that really stood out, because before working on the project, I felt a lot of the time that the solutions part of it was a little bit hard to understand. But just in working on the project, I think some of those things, like Luis was saying, of just taking care to understand the nuance and the different identities of every person that we talk to, that as a way to solve some of those issues became much clearer to me.
Wes, I want to ask you, how did you learn to report, and was there anything specific in your education or otherwise around reporting on communities of color?
Well, so it was interesting because, and to build off of what you were talking about earlier, I think I came up at a time where we were not in a reckoning moment. And so there was not this hyper focus, even as it's already begun evaporating, there was not this hyper focus on how do we tell stories like this and what does this look like. And so my education, or my early years, was much more race neutral is not the term I want to use, but it was much less race considered, right? It wasn't that I was having to bring those ideas or that focus very often into work I was doing, and I did sometimes and other times didn't, right? But I think about that, building off the comments you were making earlier, I think about that in our context currently, right? That I actually think that when we talk about our history, we think about our history, and we think about the history of journalistic education and who gets funneled in, right? We know about kind of the post-Watergate moment where suddenly journalism had this new cachet and it was cool and it was sexy and all these people saw this as a way that they could contribute to democracy and make the world a better place. We have the same energy of the late 60s and the 70s, and you've got to, and so we saw a rush of people into journalism following this moment. I think that what we've seen in the time we're in right now is a rush of people into journalism. And it's a rush of people who, and I think the challenge is making sure that who then survives our journalistic institutions to actually get to be the journalist at the back end of it, right? That there are all types of different people who are looking around in this moment saying, the way I can change the world is through journalism, right? And I would suggest, we obviously have no numbers, so I get to make stuff up, right? I would suggest that I imagine that it probably is disproportionately people of color or people from other underrepresented groups, people who see that, oh, I can change the circumstances of people who look like me through this tool, right? Yet what we know is, and what I think one of our key challenges is, okay, so how do we take what is going to be a pool of people who at the very least reflect the diversity of the country? And like I said, and I might argue might even over-reflect the places where we have disparities. And how do we actually ensure that those people end up in our journalism? And I think that's one of our key challenges, because what we know is that our journalistic institutions, beginning with the universities and then going on to our organizations, have never done this particularly well. For me, when I work with students, both at CUNY and then as well as American, I don't, and I imagine this has probably been true for you, I don't have to spend much time convincing my students that they should be thinking about racial angles or gender angles or disparity angles or questions of equity. This is the water they swim in. And that to be someone who's a teenager in your 20s to decide you're going to go to journalism school in this moment, you're thinking about these things already. And so for me, a lot of what I focus on, and this comes from the experience of having worked in these newsrooms, is that we have a lot of the students come with the ideas, the thoughts, the sensibilities, and what they need are the meat and potatoes, here's how we execute it. And so for a lot of my students, it's like, all right, what's the idea on your list, and how do we put this through the ringer to show you how to do it? Because I think what is hard, and I don't think it's, I'll frame that differently. I think it is unfair, is that I think there are a lot of gatekeepers in our field who, when they hear people talk about a desire to do journalism that speaks to inequities, they immediately say, okay, well, that's activism, that's not journalism. Or when they hear people speak with a clarity about their own experiences, well, we know women aren't treated well. Oh, well, all right, you're an opinionated person, you don't get to do, you're not, now, to be clear, that's not an opinion, right? It's a fact, right? And it's a fact that comes from someone's lived experience, like their actual experience, their expertise from having to navigate this world and the body that they have. But I think that one of the key solutions to that, right, and it's like the old therapist trick, I pay these people money and I steal their wisdom, right, is that we control the thing that we can control. And that we are entering these institutions and these spaces where we know that the newsroom appetites and the administration's appetites and the whomever is going to be fickle, and it's going to blow with the winds. And the funders and everyone. But what we also know is that good journalism is good journalism. And that the old reporter's trick is, like, your editor says no to an idea, so you go report it out anyway, and then you make them read the story. And suddenly, yeah, no, that's a great idea. Don't tell anyone I told you not to do that. And so for our students, would love to be able to promise them a world where they're going to enter newsrooms that their brilliance and their ideas and their ambitions are recognized for what they are and are watered and taken care of. But we all know, we don't have to tell anyone in this room, that that's not the world most of our students are entering. But what we can say to them is that let's teach you how to be kick-ass journalists. Because if we can do the work, we can find a place to get this published. We can find a place that's going to appreciate it, right? That one of the things that I do appreciate about our field is that a good story is a good story. And that the best way to get above or around or underneath an editor who doesn't quite get it is to put it on the piece of paper and make them read it. So a lot of the stuff I focus on with the students really is, you've got again, I don't have to spend a ton of time. We talk about it, right? But now that we've accepted this and we have this, how do we apply our understanding of the world, and how do we partner that with a real journalistic training so that you can preemptively respond to the kind of diminishing and dismissal that you might get in some of these spaces?
Thank you. I think, just fair warning, we are going to enlist all of you, because the idea for this panel came from, I've seen a shift in my years of teaching where when I first started teaching, I don't think students were as vocal about, these are the problems in our industry, and this is how we want to report, and this is how we intend to report. And now, more so, I see students saying, like, this is who I am, this is how I report, this is the work that I do, this is the best way to do journalism. And I see them going out into a field where they may go work someplace where they will be embraced and they will be valued. They may also go out into places where they're not going to be valued so much, and where their ideas, it's like they may be met with some resistance. And so, as we were talking about the panel, part of it is, what are the solutions? Is it sort of you go in and you fight? Is it you go in and you lay low until you have some power and then you speak up? But I actually wanted to ask both Maya and Corey, just, Wes talked about you kind of coming into journalism, or sort of how he sees people coming into journalism. And I wanted to ask, why did you all decide to become journalists? I don't know who wants to go.
Is this on? Okay. Why did I decide to become a journalist? For many reasons. I think I'm an opinionated person. And so I decided to write for my high school newspaper, because at that time, Oscar Grant had just happened. And I was very moved, very upset, so I had some opinions. And that's when I decided to really, that's why I decided to go into journalism, because things were happening around me, and I knew I wanted to take a stand and, share my thoughts. But I am not one to, I had to do it my own way. I'm not one to go out and protest and make a lot of noise on the streets. I'm one to make a lot of noise on paper or on the screen. And so that's really why I decided to go into journalism.
I think for me, a lot of it was just sort of having a lot of questions about the places where I was living or growing up, and wanting to understand better the way that things were working. I think I started working, or the very first jobs that I had in journalism were at small local public radio stations. And I think that through that kind of work, when I would just get kind of sent out with a microphone into San Francisco to come back to the East Bay with some tape at the end of the day, I think those were sort of the moments where I got to see both parts of the place where I was living that I wouldn't have gotten to see otherwise, and also got to understand sort of the things that were the larger things that were at work in the place where I lived. And I think that is something that I have continued to sort of try and focus on, is that, I just think that for people who are working in the place where they live, I think that for us, there are just those greater stakes that, and you know, this isn't anything new or anything groundbreaking, but just that when you work and live in a place, then that really just helps to give you a deeper understanding of that place, and that you have a deeper connection to it. So I think that that was a big part of it for me.
So I'm going to ask you two, before I go back to Wes, to talk about how the race and journalism class informed your reporting. Did it change anything in terms of the way that you report? And can you talk about specific projects that you've worked on where that has shown?
I'll go.
Okay.
Just keep the pattern going. So Lisa's class was amazing. It completely changed the way that I thought about engaging with communities. I think we talk and we're taught a lot about engaging in the community. You know, what does that look like? How do we do it? But we had an assignment, and particularly it was to learn a little bit about a system that you don't really know about. And for me, that was the foster care system. And so I decided to do a lot of reporting for that. Basic reporting, just reading, talking to a lot of people. And I started to realize that, well, one, it was just a hard area to report on. Not a lot of people talk about it. And also, people in that space, and people in general, I think communities that are being reported on, is particularly the Black community, they don't trust journalists at all, rightfully so. They don't trust journalists. So I think what Lisa's class really taught me was to take the time to build trust. I don't think that's taught a lot in classes, how to build trust with your sources. I think we're taught how to talk to people, how to ask questions, how to listen. But in terms of building trust, I don't think a lot of journalists really know what that entails. And I don't think students really know what that entails also. So that is what really, I took it upon myself to build trust with my sources, because I found a lot of issues within the foster care system that we simply don't talk about. So for me, building trust looked like, you know, approaching my sources in a humanistic way. And to be specific, for my thesis project at UC Berkeley, my project was about mothers, Black women who are fighting to reunite with their children after they're removed by CPS, Child Protective Services. And so that is a really tough area to cover. It requires a lot of sensitivity, a lot of listening, but also you have to build trust because, you know, these mothers have been through a lot, and they've talked to a lot of people, and of course, rightfully so, they don't trust a lot of people. So yeah, that's what Lisa's class taught me, was to take the time to build trust with your sources. And through that, I was able to successfully, in my opinion, report on the story. I was able to, you know, we filmed with the mothers. We did a whole film that will be out very soon. Very excited about it.
Do you want to say where it's going to be out?
Sure. It's going to be published on The New Yorker in 2024. Thank you. Yeah, I'm really, really excited about it. And once again, because of Lisa's class, I think our relationship has gone a long way. I mean, I'm still in contact with the mothers and the organizations that I worked with to report on the story. And to be completely honest, and just to go deeper into what it means to build trust, I honestly broke every rule that you're taught in journalism, which is to, you know, keep a certain degree of separation. And, you know, I think I just offered a lot of transparency in what I was doing, and, you know, the questions that I was asking, and how I was going about reporting the story, and how I was going about building the film. my professors are gonna be really upset with me. I was sharing cuts. I was, sharing notes from the class. I was taking my sources notes and implementing that into the film. I think those are the kinds of things that you're simply not taught to do. However, I think it is necessary to teach those things because when we are trying to better report on communities of color, minority communities who have been so damaged by the media over the decades, I think we have to take those steps to repair our relationship with those communities. So that's what Lisa's class taught me. It's a long-winded response, but.
I think also, for me, I would probably go back to understanding. Also, I'd like to just second that Lisa's class was amazing and changed the way that I think about every piece of reporting. And you should all take it if you get the chance. But I think that for me, it was the first time taking Lisa's class was the first time that somebody had told me that our job was not just to talk to people and to put that onto a page. Our job was to understand in the deepest possible way some of the things that we were covering, the stories that we were covering, and the systems that undergird them. I think the folks at the Maynard Institute call it are the fault lines that cross underneath society. I mean, and to me, I think that was just the idea of trying to fully wrap my head around some of the just incredibly deep and issues that are so incredibly rooted in history, like the way that race works in this country, like the way that white supremacy and anti-Black racism have been part of the country from the beginning. And I remember talking to Lisa early on in the class and saying that it was that idea of just trying to understand all of that and to try and put it into a story was really kind of scaring me. And I mean, I remember that part of what Lisa said was that it's not necessarily that all of that has to make it into every story, but that having that background knowledge, having that understanding and that clarity of how the world and this country in particular works is just essential to being both a young journalist who is starting out and learning how to think about the work in the industry, and figuring out how to start talking to people, how to engage with the community. And so I think that sort of understanding, trying to really do as much homework as possible, do the research, and I know that it is very much a work in progress, but I think just being able to take those steps and be working on that, kind of building that knowledge in between stories, before stories, after stories, and that it's a continuous process is something that I really took from the class and has really influenced my reporting since then.
Lisa, could I ask you a question?
Yeah, and I actually had a question for you, but we have to, okay, go ahead, yeah.
I was going to ask, I think that one of the things that is difficult, one of the things I'm thinking about now that the like cocktail of my professional life includes more teaching, is I think about what are the tension points, and I think it's true in the classroom as well as in the newsroom, is that when we endeavor to do difficult work, it is difficult, and it takes time, and it takes relationship building, and it takes repetition, yet we often do that work inside of systems that are, okay, but you need to do this many assignments over the course of a semester, or the deadline is on this day, or we need this grant said we had to do 8 pieces, and so how do you think about, like I said, I grapple with that even as I now, and I try to just insulate my students from any of the rules and try, but that's, none of my bosses are in this room, I don't think, right? But like, how do you think about that, right? The work that we've heard from your former students, all of this is work that is like difficult and complex and takes time, right? And I think that sometimes we teach, right, like when we're talking about trying to do in-depth storytelling in communities that distrust us, that's like open heart surgery. And we're like, all right, cool. So by next Tuesday, you've got the surgery done, right? You've never done any medical work at all. And by next Tuesday, you've done an open heart surgery. And then by the week after that, you'll have edits on it, right? And we have like our leading professional journalists couldn't do this work in that period of time, right? And would reject the premise. Well, I can't do that in 2 weeks, right? How do you think about that as you're teaching? The balance of, you know, how we work inside of our systems and structures and how we show that repetition, but also trying to create the space to have it actually be done in a way that's usable.
Yeah, I mean, I think the nice thing about creating a class, so again, I'm hired to just sort of create this class out of the blue, was I could create sort of whatever I wanted. So the assignments that I came up with were very intentional. But I also said to the students that, like, this is 15 weeks. So whatever you're learning in the 15 weeks, like, this is a taste, this is sort of this is what I'm trying to teach you. You can either accept or reject it. So I'm not sort of like, I'm the professor, I know everything. I might be learning from you all too. And I have learned a lot from my students. Like I've actually changed the way that I think about my own journalism from things that students have said. But I think it really is about thinking about, like, what is it that I want them to learn in this 15 weeks? And then what can they take with them? So for instance, I didn't work on Maya's thesis with her. Like, she did a film. I don't teach film. And so, and the project that Corey started in my class, I didn't work with him on that either. That was his thesis. So they worked with other people, but they took something that started in my class and they used it to create, in Corey's case, an audio piece that was on NPR. And yeah, so I think it's about planting the seed.